This looks real ugly. The whole thing kind of looks ugly, but it especially looks ugly with our description list in there. Let's make it less ugly. This is not a CSS class, but I'll do a little CSS live, kind of explain as I go. We're not going to slow down and explain it a whole bunch. If you want to learn more about this stuff, I can recommend some good tutorials. There's not time to go into excruciating detail here, but let's see what we can do. Anybody use Google Fonts before? The fonts are not the worst thing about this by any stretch, but let's try using a different font. Right now, we're just using the default sans serif font on your platform. On a Mac, it's probably Helvetica. On Windows, it's probably Arial. Let's go to Google Fonts. Fonts.google.com. About to get his laptop fixed. Okay. Yep. Oh, man, there's all kinds of good-looking stuff here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting clever here because it's just not the point. Ooh, Dosis here looks kind of neat. Let's hit the plus here. One family selected. Ooh. All right. To embed your selected fonts into a web page, copy this code into the head of your HTML document. So what's happening here is we're linking to a style sheet that's hosted on Google. And then in our CSS, we say font family Dosis. Or instead of the standard way, we could use add import, in which case we just put this import statement at the top of our CSS file. You can do it either way. I'm going to do it this way, so I can just keep it all in my CSS. So I'm just going to copy that line in my CSS at the very top. I'm just going to throw that import statement. I'll throw this in Slack real quick. And then font family, what was it, DOSIS? Comma sans serif, meaning if that font isn't loaded for whatever reason, if it can't load or it's not on that system, it'll fall back to the next one in the list. Hey, look at that. Now it no longer looks default. Slight improvement. Yep. Just added the import and specify that font in the body. I'm going to paste these lines in Slack right now. So you can copy and paste it out of there if you need to. Very small change, but it makes it just look a little less generic. Oops. Let's see here. What if all this stuff appeared on the right instead of underneath? What if we put the list over here to the right? Because that form doesn't take up anywhere near the entire width, even of a window that small. It's quite small because of my dev tools. So what if we just stuck it over there on the right instead? How can we do that with CSS? So many different ways we could do this. Do you have an idea, Tucker? One div for the stuff on the left, one for the one on the right. Right now we've got, well, everything on the left is inside form. Everything on the right is inside div, so we kind of already do. Then how do we style it differently? Lots of ways we could do this. In the old world, we would use floats. Floats are kind of awful to deal with. we're going to go with a modern solution. We're going to use flexbox. Flexbox, can't remember how many years ago now it was added, but it has had really good support in the browsers for now a couple years. Pretty safe to use. And flexbox is really nice. And it's particularly nice for when you need things to be in a row and you don't want to use a table. Because that's kind of hard to do using other methods. But it's really easy with flexbox. So it would be nice if everything in that row were kind of in a single container element. So we could wrap this div and the form all in another div. We could also use an HTML5 element like main, which is just like a div but has a more descriptive name. So that's what I'm going to do. And if you look at the tools page on the website in my VS Code extensions, I've set up a keyboard shortcut for wrapping elements in other elements. I have made that shortcut Shift-Command-A. If I type main or div or whatever, it just does that for me. It puts the closing tag down here and the opening tag up here. I do that enough that that keyboard shortcut is wonderful. There is no keyboard shortcut for that thing by default, but that command is built in. But again, if you look at my keyboard shortcuts up there on the website, you can see how to do that. So I just wrapped both the form and this div inside another element, which I've called main. So what I need to do in CSS is just tell it that this main element should use flexbox. So I'll use the display property for that. CSS rules consist of a selector, the same kinds of selectors that you pass into query selector, followed by a series of properties, colon, and the values for those properties. Display has several possible values: block, inline, inline block. Flex is the one we want. Divs and paragraphs and things like that are blocks by default. Things like EM, emphasis, and links, and other stuff that kind of appears in the middle of a line are called inline elements. Kind of makes sense. So block elements basically get a new line before and after them. That's the difference. They appear on a line by themselves. Inline elements do not. Similarly, block elements can have padding and margins. Inline elements can't. So we're going to display it as a flexbox. Now by itself, what's that going to do? Let's refresh the page. Did I answer your question along the way? Or, okay. Okay, now they're side by side. Doesn't look great, but now they're side by side. It'd be nice if they weren't squished together. So now main is a flex container, just because I said DisplayFlex. Again, this is not a flexbox class. If you want to learn more about it, I have a couple really good links for you. But basically, the two immediate children of that are my flex items. And I can specify how I want those things to be laid out relative to one another. What we've got here is that everything is just smashed against the start of this row. I want them spread out a little more. There are several ways I could do that. So I could tell it that all of the items in my main should be spread out a certain way. And for that, I use something called justify content. Oops, this is not JavaScript, this is CSS. Justify content has a whole bunch of possible values, such as flex end and flex start. Flex items are packed toward the end of the line. If I say flex end, they're packed toward the start of the line with flex start. Flex start, as you may have figured out, is the default. Let's just play around with this right here in the DevTools. So I've got main selected here, and down here I can see all of the CSS that's being applied to it. DisplayFlex, for example. So let's say justify content. Let's do flex end instead of flex start. And look at that. They're smashed against the right side. Other possible values for justified content? Space around and space between. Space evenly. Space around. So these two things are both kind of skinny. They're not particularly big, which means there's going to be extra space left over even after I put them side by side. So I'm telling it what to do with the extra space. If I say flex start, all the extra space goes to the right. If I say flex end, all the extra space goes toward the beginning. If I say space around, it's spread evenly before the first item, in between the items, and at the end. Space between puts all the space in between the two things with none at the edges. Space around looks better, doesn't it? Let's do space around. Okay, I like that. So I'm just fiddling around in my dev tools right now. Notice there's a little checkbox there. If I wanted to turn this rule off to see what it looked like without it, it looked like that. With it, looks like this. Yeah, Pooja.
So when you change the code, does it change it in your...
It does not. It does not actually save these things. So now we've decided, what? Now that we've decided we want this rule, we need to copy it and put it in here. Justify content space around. This is not JavaScript. The semicolons are not optional, by the way. So it looks better already. Let's do a little more to differentiate our form from our business on the right there. I could just select the form by using form, an element name selector. I could use hash user form because I think that's what it's called, right? You use the same exact selectors that you do in query selector. These were CSS selectors first. So what about user form? What if we give it a background color? Let's make it something obnoxious just to see if it works. Oh, look at that. It tells me the hex code for red. Refresh. Oh, great. So I can see, for one thing, obnoxious color or not, it could use a little padding. I think I pointed this out once before, but our dev tools also show us, let's get our form selected here. Here's the element itself. Here's the padding, border, margin. There is no padding right now. Difference between padding and margin: the padding is inside the border. The margin is outside the border. The margin is the space between things. The padding is what it sounds like. It's just the kind of extra space around the content, but inside the element, sort of. Let's add a little padding to this. Again, we can experiment over here rather than going back to the code, refreshing, going back to the code, refreshing. Let's just experiment. Padding, 1 rim. What's a rim? It's basically the default, what you're saying?
I think usually it's 16 pixels relative to...
Yeah, it's by default 16 pixels most of the time, but it's the font size for the page. So 2 rims would be double the font size for the page. That looks like a decent amount of padding. I'm okay with that. Let's say user form, padding 1 rim. I think that background color is a bit much. I'm just going to make it a really light gray. To do gray, just make all your hex digits the same. So all Fs would be white. All zeros would be black. F isn't a number, you're saying? So hexadecimal is a number system 0 through 15, because that's 16 total. So we have 0 through 9, and then we have A, B, C, D, E, F. So those have become digits. We have 2 digits representing each of red, green, and blue. So EE EE. That would be a pretty light gray. And I have an extension here that actually shows me the color in place. What if I have E's for those and that? Oh, I get yellow. Lots of red and green and no blue. Nice light gray. I like that. Fine. Let's put a border around it. Almost just as light, but not quite. So I'll say border. There's border width, border color, border style. Or you can put them all in a single property called border. In which case you say the width first. 1 pixel's fine. The style next. Let's say solid. And then the color. And I'll say hash E3, E3, E3. A light gray, but not quite that light. Refresh. Oh, man. What'd I do? My padding went away. What the heck? Why'd it go away? Because I broke my whole style sheet because I forgot a gosh darn semicolon. That's why. Now, my editor did give me a clue here. Semicolon expected. Try that again. That's better. Cool. Let's make that other part show up a bit. There we go. Not too bad. But these bullets are kind of silly looking. Let's see if we can get rid of those. I'll go ahead and commit what we have. Use flexbox and style the form. Let's push. Since this much is decent, let's go ahead and commit before we screw something up.